Thank you. It's really wonderful to be here with you in this beautiful space, in this particular place and time. Exodus 12 is a text. Exodus 12. Good? This is a text that we learn to take very seriously. It is the night before the 10th plague, the climax of a great drama, battle between good and evil. And Moses wants the Israelites to be aware of just how serious this moment is. It's a kind of threshold in time and space. But let's be unserious for a moment, and let's notice just how odd the text of Exodus 12 really is. We're poised at the climax of an incredible action story. It's the battle of the evil food-hoarding king versus the God of the enslaved. And then suddenly a voice from the future pops in with a lecture about Passover customs, past, present, and future, complete with recipes. And then the future somehow seeps back into the past, into the main story, and suddenly 1 million Israelites, because that's how many the Torah says there are, suddenly 1 million Israelites are slaughtering, dressing, and cooking 333,000 lambs, because that's how many lambs it would take to feed them all. And they are doing this while packing up to leave, all in one night. How are they doing this? Does God make the sun stand still until the work is finished? Or is the last night in Egypt somehow like one of the original days of creation? Maybe 6 days long, 6 weeks long, 6 months long, who knows how long? Are there extra miracles hidden in the story that we forgot to notice before? Because we're so stuck in the one way that we learn to read this text? When you let go of familiar interpretations, the Hebrew Bible, which is already pretty interesting, gets a lot more interesting. And because this is the season of creation, also in Jewish tradition, I want to try reading a different text with fresh eyes, and that's the story of the snake in the Garden of Eden. I think you might know this story. The crafty snake tempts the humans to disobey God, and after that, snakes and humans are enemies forever in a terrible world of food scarcity and sorrow. But what happens if we just try to let go of this very sad interpretation? And instead, we try to read a story about the wisdom of a snake, well-meaning but maybe misguided, a story about the wisdom of a snake, and a story celebrating the old friendship between humans and snakes. To follow this retelling, you have to be willing to let go of the way you have heard or read this story in the past, and you have to know 2 things. Number 1, the biblical writers knew a lot about snakes. And number 2, I admit this is a really weird interpretation. I have never read it anywhere. It is not official. in any tradition that I know of, but you can read it in my book, Mouth of the Donkey, Reimagining Biblical Animals. So, let's give the new old story a try. And here we are in the Garden of Eden. Enter the snake. The Hebrew tells us that the snake is the most arum of all the land animals. And the Hebrew word arum means both prudent and naked. And when you're talking about snakes, it makes sense to use a word that conveys both of those meanings, because snakes are prudent and snakes are sometimes naked. Today, there are at least 3,000 species of snakes in the world, and no two are exactly alike, but snake life does have some themes. Arum can describe a snake's prudent life strategy. Snakes are very efficient animals. Many snakes are ambush predators. They rest camouflaged, waiting for their prey to wander by. And they often wait under leaves or under dirt, where they have very little use for vision. So their eyesight often is not very keen. But they do hear, in a way. They feel vibrations as their prey approaches. And because they are ectothermic animals who warm themselves in the sun, their heat sensors are strong. So they track their prey by its heat signature. And then, after their food has come to them and they haven't expended much energy to get it, then they eat their weekly or monthly meal, and they convert 80% of the food to body mass. One friend who loves her pet ball python says, "My snake cannot be a glutton. Mercy is built into her eating process. She is beautifully efficient." The Hebrew word arum also hints at the way that snakes grow, by getting naked. As a snake gets bigger, the top layer of its skin stretches. And when the skin reaches its limit, the snake gets ready to shed that old skin. And as the outer skin begins to loosen, fluid collects underneath it, and the snake's eyes turn blue. Its body gets cloudy. The snake will often rub its face against a rough object to loosen the skin, maybe a stone or some tree bark, and then the snake will gradually wriggle out. Snakes usually shed 4 to 12 times a year, and the process takes a few days. My snake-loving friend says, "I'm jealous. Shedding seems so refreshing." So in the story, the biblical snake visits the humans and strikes up a conversation. If you remember how the story in Genesis 2 goes, God creates Adam, then God creates some animals to see if they're the right mate for Adam, and they're not, and then God creates Eve, and Adam says, "Whoa, this is amazing, essence of my essence. Yeah, you got it right, God." So the snake visits the humans and strikes up a conversation, and he seems quite curious about them. And he must wonder at what strange creatures they are. He wonders, what life instructions did the Creator give them? Do they, like me, eat small animals and avoid fruit? So the snake asks the woman, "Did God also say to you, 'Don't eat from any trees in the garden'?" And the woman says, "No, we do feed on the garden trees." But then she's trying to find some kinship with the snake, so she explains that God did also tell the humans to avoid some of the trees. And she says, yeah, but about the fruit of the tree in the middle, God said not to eat it and not to touch it to avoid the risk of dying. Not to touch it. This seems really wrong to the snake, because the snake can't even grow unless he touches the tree and rubs against the branch to start his shed. And in fact, if you look at the text, the woman is mistaken. God did give Adam, the first human, life instructions: don't eat from the tree. But the woman was not yet born, though the snake was. So how did the woman find out what God said about not to eat from the tree? Did God repeat the instructions to her? Did the man tell her? The narrator doesn't answer the questions. We only learn that the woman gets them wrong. She thinks God said don't touch, when God just said don't eat. So the snake offers a little mentoring from a snake's point of view. He realizes that the woman has not heard the instructions very well. Maybe she's preparing to shed her skin. Maybe she has a little fluid in her ears. Whatever the reason, one thing is clear to the snake. She does not know the good way to live. The human woman does not know the good way to live. So the snake coaches her on what he thinks God intended. The snake says, you won't surely die. God knows that on the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened. And you, like God, will know what's good and what's bad for you. Or in other words, come on, let the tree help you. Start your shed, free up your eyes, let your body grow, and then you'll understand how your species is supposed to live. So the woman checks out the fruit. By the way, all the quotations I am using here are perfectly acceptable literal translations of the Hebrew, so I am not changing up the words. The woman checks out the fruit using her most powerful human sense, that is, sight. And the text says, she sees that the fruit is good for eating and it's desirable to the eyes. She wants to know about life, and she now sees that the tree is also delightful for knowing. So because she wants to know, she eats, and she gives some to the man, who suddenly seems to be with her. And he also eats. And then something changes. Their eyes open, and they see that they, like the snake, are now erumim. They are naked and they are prudent. It's as if they have shed their skin and removed the cloudy membrane from their eyes. They are refreshed physically and mentally, and now they know the good way to live, they think. So hopefully, once you go back and read the text, you will not be able to unsee this. What happens next? The humans start to act like snakes. They no longer rely on sight, but they rely on their snake senses, reacting to vibration and to temperature. The text says they hear the sound of God walking in the garden at the breezy time of day. So, like shy snakes, they hide themselves in a garden tree. And it seems that God did not expect them to do this. So God calls out, "Where are you?" And the man says, I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I'm Erom. So I hid myself. God wonders, how did this change of consciousness come about? So God asks, who told you that you're Erom? Did you maybe eat from the tree I told you not to eat from? And the man says, well, yes, I did. And here's how it happened. The woman you placed with me, she gave to me from the tree, and I ate. And God is still a bit puzzled because that doesn't really solve the mystery. So God turns to the woman and asks, what is this you did? She says, the snake raised me up and I ate. And now God, the character of God in the story, who, let's face it, in Genesis 2 is not portrayed as all-knowing, but as someone who's figuring out how to be a God and how to be a creator as things go. The character of God now understands the snake has shared its life wisdom with the people, but this wisdom is not right for humans. For the same reason that the snake was not the right mate for the human. It turns out, and I say it turns out because really in Genesis 2, God is just figuring out what is this thing called a species. Turns out that the humans and the snake are different species. And God sets out to remind them of that. You, snake, you will slither on your belly. Those little bony spurs on the back of your spine, and you may know that snakes are actually classified biologically as four-limbed tetrapods, and some species do have little vestigial legs on their spine. Okay, that's not God, that's modern biology, but I'm just sticking that in there, right? God says, you snake, you'll slither onto your belly, and those little bony spurs on the back of your spine, they will not be growing into legs like the humans have anytime soon. So just stop hanging out with the humans for a while. From now on, only their heels will come into contact with your head. You stay down there. And you, woman, you will not give birth as a snake does. You will not have dozens of babies at once. Every single one will be hard work. And there will be no parthenogenesis for you, no reproduction on your own without a mate, which, by the way, several snake species can do. You, human woman, will always need your human mate. And if you want more life wisdom from an older creature, get it from him, please, because, as the Hebrew says, hu yimshol bach. And usually the phrase is translated as he will rule, hu yimshol bach, he will rule over you. But the Hebrew verb yimshol also means will tell you a wise proverb. And so God says, not the snake, please, but let the older human, your man, teach you the good way to live. And you, God says, and you, human man, you don't copy the snake either. You will not be an ambush predator. You will not get to lie in wait for your next meal to come to you. Instead, you will have to pull grain out of the parched ground, and you are going to work up a sweat, turning it into bread. And in response, the humans do not challenge, they do not argue. But the human man does enact a very small act of resistance, because he has the power to call out and name. He gives his mate a new name. He calls her Chava, Eve, which is an old Aramaic word for snake. I'm not making this up. Next, God creates robes made of skin. That's what the text says. God creates robes made of skin and dresses the humans. It looks like they will never shed again. I mean, technically we shed all the time, but not in the dramatic way that a snake does. They won't shed again in that dramatic way. Their time of experimentation is over, their time of species experimentation. But the memory of that time lives on in Eve's name. Think about it. The name of the man, Adam, human, from the humus of the soil, reminds us of our close relationship with the land. And the name of the first human woman, Chava, or Eve, reminds us of a time when we deeply respected the wisdom of other creatures and when we accepted their friendship. And I do not need to give you any more instructions or exhortations about how to find our way back to that time, to that perspective of loving the land and its creatures. But I do want to share with you my very strong belief that our sacred texts celebrate that time and encourage us to find them again, to find that time again, and to live into it as fully as we can. Thank you.